What people appreciate about my work is my capacity to bring it all together, bring everything together.
He's the author of 5 best-selling books.
Published in over 30 languages.
So you see that it's all one process, that mind and body can't be separated. They're not separated in real life. People's social lives, emotional lives impact their physiology. Their relationships impact how their brains develop. That what we call pathology are actually processes that are responses to life experience rather than just strokes of misfortune.
For him, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain.
He is the creator of a psychotherapeutic approach called compassionate inquiry,
which has students in over 80 countries.
And if we can unravel all that and see the connections, we can actually provide some guidance to healing. So it's that unitary vision that I was able to develop, learning a lot from all these colleagues that I'm referring to, but incorporating that into a broader vision. I think that's what I've been able to do.
Through compassionate inquiry, we can recognize the unconscious dynamics that run our lives
and how to liberate ourselves from them.
There's nothing fundamentally wrong with anybody. There's distortions of development which are normal responses to abnormal circumstances. And therefore, we can all come back to ourselves. So nobody should believe that they're damaged goods or beyond healing. There's nothing wrong with you fundamentally, and everything you feel or believe is wrong with you is actually a response to life experiences, and that the wounds that you carry can be healed.
This is a podcast about how we as individuals can heal.
And how we as a collective can heal.
What you need is stories, what you need is people with their experiences and what they've learned from their experiences, or what they are willing to learn from their experiences, and what lessons can they derive, and what lessons can your audience derive.
So, in case you didn't know, that was Gabor Maté. We had the incredible privilege of being able to sit down with him and create this very first episode for you to orient you, dear listener, to this project. What we also got to do in this very first show is break the news to Gabor that this project exists. So we wanted to invite you into this conversation. So if you are one of the many, many millions at this point who's been touched, whose eyes have been opened a little wider, who sees the world a little bit brighter, intrigued by the work of Gabor and his teachings about what a trauma-informed society can look like, then we are so delighted that you're here, because you are the reason we created this show. We hope you really enjoy this first episode with Gabor, interviewed by Rosemary and Kevin, and at the end you'll get to meet and learn just a little bit about each of us involved in this show.
Welcome, Gabor. So happy to have you here with us today.
I just show up and I never know what I'm doing, okay, or why I'm doing it. So
the reason that you're here with Rosemary and I today is this is the start of the Compassionate Inquiry podcast. And myself and Rosemary and 2 other women, Jem and Mary Russell, with the support of the marketing team and Satram and it's the admin team, are developing the Compassionate Inquiry podcast.
You know, Kevin, to tell you the truth, I was barely even aware of it. In fact, it's news to me that there's going to be a CI podcast. So I don't have much to say about it, except I'm happy to support you whatever way I can.
And given that we're here to promote and support your work, I'm going to do my best Gabor Maté impression and find a little quote to read to you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And a question after that. And the quote is, you've got to be fearless in this stuff. You really got to be fearless. You need to have the confidence that there is another side, that the person is coming to you because they really want to know the truth. Have some confidence in yourself that you can mirror the truth for them. And you'll maybe recognize that that's you, that quote. And my question after that is, as the Compassionate Inquiry podcast, what can we do to be fearless in delivering your work?
Well, Kevin, I don't know, because I don't know how much fear you're facing. I suppose I suppose you have to be confident that you have something worthwhile to say, and it's worthwhile to say it. And it doesn't matter how many people are listening in the beginning, but that you have the confidence that the message is important and compelling enough and necessary enough that you persist in it to at least give it a good go. In other words, not to worry about what somebody might define as failure. That's about all I can say about it. I mean, there's not too many negative consequences that can possibly follow from what you're doing, except quote unquote lack of success.
We're really keen to have your guidance, I suppose, Gabor. What would you like us to be delivering to people? What would you like us to help them hear about your work?
Yeah, really, we share the vision of creating a trauma-informed world. We're willing to be multiple hands taking the baton that you are carrying so well yourself, but more hands is always better. And also, we're taking a leaf from the Wisdom of Trauma movie.
Oh, yeah.
And really, as you said, as we were talking about stories, anecdotes, the podcast really is an ability to dive a little deeper into individual stories and see how the trauma tapestry is woven, like unravel those threads a little bit so that we can have some depth over, weekly interviews for as long as the podcast runs. So that's really what we're up to here. And, since you have been doing this work and inspired this podcast, we wanted you to be our first guest. So that's
I get that. And you know what? When Kevin was asking this question, I did have this thought. I didn't articulate it. What you need is stories. What you need is people with their experiences and what they've learned from their experiences, or what they are willing to learn from their experiences, from their challenges, from their so-called pathologies, from their difficulties, and what lessons can they derive, and what lessons can your audience derive. And I think I'm glad to hear you say that that's what your intention is.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you're the inspiration. So, we're very happy to have this creative challenge. I think you might have fun with this.
Yeah.
We are working on coming up with an official name for the Compassionate Inquiry podcast, because that's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
And we've got 4
candidates
in our final pick. So I'd love to get your thoughts on these. I'll just read them to you.
Mm-hmm.
First one is the impact of trauma. Number 2 is the gifts of trauma. Number 3 is the gifts of compassion. And number 4 is the tapestry of trauma.
Well, I don't know, but the impact is rather negative. So the gift is more intriguing,
It's you wouldn't think of trauma and gift put together in that juxtaposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
In my research, obviously I read your bio. I also looked at the publication dates on your books. And is Scattered Minds the first book that you wrote?
It was published in 1999.
Right, great. So if I get the dates wrong, please correct me. But from what I gathered, you were a medical doctor in family practice and palliative care for about 20 years.
That's correct.
Then you started working with addicts in Vancouver's downtown east side, and you did that for roughly 10 years.
12 years, yeah.
12 years. Okay, great. And then you transition to this path that you're on now, which is speaking and writing and basically educating the public on the wisdom of trauma, the impact of trauma, really bringing it into the conversation. Would that be accurate? So it's about 25 years now?
Yes, it is. But in addition to that, I've also helped develop this therapeutic modality called compassionate inquiry. We've had about 3,500 students, I think, in the last 4 years in 80 countries. So I do a lot of training of therapists as well. And, I travel all over the world speaking. But more or less, that's been the trajectory of medical practice and writing and teaching. And
teaching both the general public and the professional community. Okay, great. Thank you. So as you think back over the 25 years that you've been educating people on trauma, what are you seeing now? Like, what are you seeing as the impact of that? What's happening now that you aimed perhaps to achieve back when you first started?
I don't rightly know that I've ever had any aims. I just sort of did what I was called to do next, but I never had a long-term vision as such. But if I look back as to how it's gone, this September, this may sound self-serving and perhaps self-congratulatory, but I don't mean it that way. This September, I'll be speaking in London at the Troxy and the Barbican. I think 2,000 or 3,000 people each time. It's sold out 6 months in advance. I'm participating in a trauma conference with some of my mentors and certainly colleagues, Bessel and Vanderkolk and, other people. That conference, that trauma conference in Oxford, is sold out, months in advance. Bessel's book, The Body Keeps the Score, has been on the New York Times bestsellers list for the last 300 weeks, I think.
Wow.
A book on trauma, and not an easy book, by the way. My book, The Myth of Normal, published less than 2 years ago now, was 19 weeks on New York Times bestsellers list. Just spent 5 weeks on the Sunday Times bestsellers in England. It's been published in 40 countries.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere I go, everywhere my colleagues go talk about trauma, huge interest, huge thirst, hunger, actually, on the part of people to understand.
Yeah.
So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, within the medical profession, there's a very slow, very reluctant, and even resistant response to this new information. So there's been tremendous public awareness, burgeoning of a movement to incorporate trauma into our understanding of human experience. That's been heartening to see and totally unpredictable. My first book, being on attention deficit disorder, published 25 years ago now. A year ago, hit the New York Times bestsellers list, and if you look on Amazon, it's one of the top-selling books. I'm not saying all this, although naturally it's very satisfying to say all this, but I'm answering your question. There's been tremendous public awareness of these issues now, looking at mental health and physical health issues and people's difficulties in life from a trauma-informed perspective. So that's been remarkable, quite unforeseen by me. I'm not sure it's been foreseen by anybody. On the one hand, on the other hand, the lamentable reluctance on the part of professionals to understand this information.
Well, I'm curious, would the general public, being, obviously their appetite has been whetted for this conversation and they're responding, they, obviously from the numbers you've stated, they're showing up in droves. Would they not be putting pressure on their individual medical practitioners would they not be bringing the conversation to them?
Well, I'm sure that's happening. The example that occurs to me is midwifery. I'll tell you why. Or not just midwifery in general, but what we call non-medicalized labor. So when I was trained in delivering babies, it was all mechanized. The woman was going to lie on her back on a narrow metal slab, her feet up in the air in stirrups. I was going to cut every woman's vaginal opening, episiotomy. And then midwifery, which was strenuously opposed by the medical profession, began to be more popular. Women started demanding that doctors listen, and to a certain degree that's happened. And it was to the degree that not nearly sufficiently, and in fact, in some ways things have just got more mechanized, but at least a certain percentage of women were able to put pressure on their doctors to open their eyes to different ways of conducting human labor. And so that's an example where pressure actually created some change. So I think it's going to happen. I think it is happening. And what the other thing is happening is that more patients are going to naturopathic doctors, so-called alternative practitioners. I always say alternative to what? But, as if there's one standard and everything else is an alternative. It's kind of a medical arrogance. But so that's happening. There are movements within medicine called integrative medicine, integrative psychiatry, functional medicine. All of these modalities take a much broader view than the narrow Western medical perspective. So all that's happening. And largely it's happening because of public interest and public pressure.
My first introduction to you was through the movie The Wisdom of Trauma.
Yeah.
And is there anything in particular that people tend to be really surprised by, really responsive to, that they're hungering for more information on?
I would say everything. And I don't mean that again in egotistical sense. I mean, by everything, I mean that everything belongs together. Everything is non-separable. It's all one. And where I come into it, it's a little bit different from my colleagues. Like most of the colleagues that I speak with internationally or who doing their own work specialize in one thing or another. Like they're psychiatrists or psychologists or they're therapists in relationship and this and that. Me, I wasn't trained in any of those fields. I was a family physician, a general practitioner, which means I dealt with all of those things all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I think what people appreciate about my work is my capacity to bring it all together, bring everything together, to see that it's all one process, that mind and body can't be separated. They're not separated in life. People's social lives, emotional lives impact their physiology, their relationships impact how their brains develop, that what we call pathology are actually processes that are responses to life experience rather than just strokes of misfortune in many, many cases, most cases. And if we can unravel all that and see the connections, we can actually provide some guidance to healing. So it's that unitary vision that as a generalist, I was able to develop, learning a lot from all these colleagues that I'm referring to, but incorporating that into a broader vision. I think that's what I've been able to contribute.
I would 100% agree with that, because When the Body Says No was your first book that I read.
Yeah.
And I have since referred it to many, many people. And what I really appreciate is that you did the legwork. You know, there's a very relatable story that's backed up with scientific evidence and all packaged in a very consumable way. It's beautiful the way that you sort of wrap everything up so that it's an irrefutable package, really. That's my perspective.
Well, thanks. It's interesting. Sometimes critics who don't want to accept my perspective will say, I use anecdotes and anecdotes don't prove anything. I agree with them. I don't use anecdotes to prove anything. I use them to illustrate things. You know, the proof is in the scientific studies that I also cite. So I like to use a combination of scientific research. There's been a lot of it, and individual stories. By the way, I don't even agree that anecdotes don't prove anything. Actually, I think human experience proves a lot if one knows how to look at it properly. So this whole idea that everything is to be studied and documented, it's just like, let me ask you a question. Has anybody ever proven that love exists in a laboratory test tube? Ask somebody to tell me, prove to me that love exists. You can't. What you can show is the impact of when love is missing.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, as 25 years into your education and teaching platform, what are you most excited about as you look forward? What's on the horizon, near or far, that is really getting you excited these days?
Well, I can answer that in the personal and the professional realm. In the professional realm, I'm working on my new book with my son, Daniel. It's going to be called Hello Again, a fresh start for parents and adult children. It's based on a workshop that we gave him. We just finished the first two chapters. We have to finish the manuscript by the end of August. So in the professional realm, that's the next step for me, is to get that book written. It's a very exciting project. There's been a real alienation between generations in this culture, and people are hurt. Both parents and adult kids are often coming from a place of hurt, misunderstanding, longing for contact, but barriers to contact. And we're hoping to help people come to a place where they're at peace with that relationship, whether the relationship will be active and intimate or whether it'll be at a distance or non-existent. We want people to be at peace with wherever they're at, with the generational dynamics. So that's exciting. In the personal realm, I always have my own challenges. And the biggest one, if I could sum it up that way, is the gap between what I'm able to teach the world and the truths, at least as best I can clarify them, that flow through me, that people appreciate, with all these thousands of people internationally come to hear me speak, and 2.6 million followers on Instagram, whatever that means. I don't manage that account. So there's, on the one hand, there's that, and the persona and the public image that goes with it. And then the internal experience of depression, anxiety, or confusion, or resentment, or upset. In my marriage, relational difficulties. In other words, the person who's out there and the persona that's fixated in people's minds is not who I am. And so bridging that gap, I don't want that gap anymore, and recently I reached out for therapy and other healing modalities to help close that gap. Because I don't want to live like that. And no, I'm not trying to paint some dire picture here that there's a total chasm between the one and the other. There isn't. But neither is there complete congruity. And I just like that unity that I talk about to be more active in my life, and that takes work on my part. So that's what excites me on a personal level.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about you is you've kind of intentionally or unintentionally blasted a big hole in the whole ageism conversation, because you are constantly learning and growing, and you're blowing through a lot of stereotypes, and I personally appreciate that, because it's no person should be kept in a box, and certainly not because they've reached a certain age. There's so much wisdom available through people who've got several decades of life experience under their belts.
Several, in my case, is an understatement. But in any case, I was just reading some of the Greek tragedies, and I think it's in the Agamemnon or Oedipus or one of the Greek tragedies. There's a line, I could find it if I looked for it, that the older person who can still learn or still curious is still young, and that's, you know what, if there's one message to everything I teach, is just be curious. Like, don't take anything for granted. Don't automatically believe what you've been told, but just be curious all the time, and that way you'll stay young. That doesn't mean you find the right answers, but if you look at young kids, as I think about it now, what's the big characteristics of young kids is endless curiosity. They just want to discover everything. And, what's this and what's that? And what does this taste like? And what does that feel like? And then we give that up, and then we think we know. And that's when there's a lot of old people around in their 20s, who've lost that curiosity. And on the other hand, they may be people in their 60s, 70s, 80s who are still young that way. And your curiosity is the characteristics of youth, actually, if anything.
I agree 100%. Yeah. I've got a beautiful example of that very briefly.
Yeah.
I was at an 80th birthday party of my first work mentor the other day.
Oh.
And she was hanging out with her grandchildren because she's very curious. They're very curious. The rest of them were sitting around talking about hip replacements and health issues. And yeah, it like there's a certain divide that's pretty obvious. And it's almost as if this whole thing we have in the first world about retiring is like the first step towards exiting the world, because so many people, according to that party, who retire, they just sort of check out without leaving. So,
That's right.
I love the drive, the curiosity, and maybe there's a culture shift available there too. One last question. You've told us about your upcoming book, which is great. Do you have an estimate on publication date? Will it be this year or next year?
It will not be this year. I would expect late 2025. Fall of 2025, I think, is the hope.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
There's also a new movie coming out, Where
Yeah.
Olive Trees Weep. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. When you ask me what engages me these days, I didn't go there because it's political. But I mean, my heart has been occupied territory for the last 7 months. In fact, 4 years before then, the whole Palestine situation is something I've been, as a Jew and as a former Zionist, I've been very engaged with for many, many decades. I've been to the occupied territories 3 times, including 2 years ago. And the same people that made the film The Wisdom of Trauma accompanied me to Palestine 2 years ago now, just as we speak, 2 years ago in May, because I was giving a workshop for Palestinian women tortured in Israeli jails. And they actually asked me, they tell me that they asked me, what should we do our next film about? I said, how about indigenous people? And so they've made a series of films about indigenous people in the Amazon, in Haida Gwaii in British Columbia, in the United States, in Africa, in Australia, and in Palestine. And the first in that series is a film entitled Where the Olive Trees Weep, which is about the experience of the Palestinians in the context of the occupation. I'm in the film very briefly, related to this workshop that I led, but it's only about a 3-minute sequence at most, if that much. The film really is about the olive trees and Palestine and the land and the people. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. It's called Where the Olive Trees Weep. You can look for it online. It'll be shown internationally. I hope it is seen by many people because, first of all, it's just a beautiful artistic experience. But secondly, it just speaks the truth. And it's a truth that the Western media, for all kinds of reasons, just barely covers or even, I should say, distorts. And, within the healing community and within compassionate inquiry community, I've had more than a little pushback from some of my Jewish followers and Israeli followers who are just appalled that I should speak out in the way I do. But you know what? That goes back to something I talk about a lot: authenticity versus attachment. As children, we have to choose relationship. And if that means suppressing our true selves, we do it because we can't help it. As adults, we have a decision to make. Do we go with our truth, or do we go with whether people like us or not, if the two are not compatible? When I say our truth, that doesn't make anybody automatically right. I'm just talking about what you, in good faith and good conscience, after due investigation, believe to be truth. Are you going to go with that and speak it? Or are you going to suppress it so that people will not unfollow you and not dislike you? So I made that decision a long time ago. So I know it's hard on people. They have a certain perspective. They've been trained, in fact, marinated in a certain way of looking at the world, to which what I'm saying may seem inimical, certainly foreign. That's how the cookie crumbles, you know. So that's that film, Where the Olive Trees Weep. Beautiful.
Well, they do. Their productions are stunning and impactful, and it's the truth to say that The Wisdom of Trauma changed the trajectory of my life. I pivoted my career, and everything changed once I watched that movie. And it's like, I don't know why I have to follow this, but this is what's next for me. So, and it's exciting also to hear that they've got a series of new movies coming up. This one being the first. So I'm already signed up for the premiere. So thank you for sharing that with us. Anything else that you'd like to say to, perhaps anyone listening to this who this is the first time they've heard about you and your work? What would be the next steps to go out there and get curious about the impact of trauma in their own life?
Well, only this, that all of us are born expecting, not consciously, organismically expecting love and acceptance and validation and being seen. And anything that goes wrong with us, quote unquote, arises from those unmet expectations. Not being loved in the sense of the emotions of the parents, but that love not getting through because they didn't know how to see us, didn't know how to validate us, maybe hurt us like I've hurt my children. So that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with anybody. there's distortions of development which are normal responses to abnormal circumstances. And therefore, we can all come back to ourselves. And so nobody should believe that they're damaged goods or beyond healing. There are many pathways, compassion inquiry being one of them, but it's the only one. It's not a panacea. No one method is a panacea. But just if you open your eyes, if you get that there's nothing wrong with you fundamentally, and everything you feel or believe is wrong with you is actually a response to life experiences, and that the wounds that you carry can be healed. Yeah. Just and then they get curious about it. That's a very broad statement, but that's my general advice.
That really lands. And you're reminding me of a conversation I had with Gary Craig about 20 years ago, the founder of Emotional Freedom Technique.
Okay.
And it was a very difficult concept to explain. So, he would do his best to explain it verbally in an audio format, and sort of wrapped it up by saying, it often helps when nothing else will. Mm-hmm. And I would say the same about the compassionate inquiry approach that you pioneered, that's now being made into a training program for therapists and coaches and all kinds of healing professionals. I have seen it work often, and I would invite anyone listening. We will have links in the show notes so people can find resources to explore and experiment with themselves. But I've seen compassionate inquiry be highly, highly effective where other approaches haven't. So I love that we're ending this on inviting or perhaps inciting curiosity in the listeners.
And just to be fair, we might also say that some other approaches might work when this one doesn't, So
absolutely. Everybody's different. Yeah.
We don't claim exclusive rights to success or healing, but, yeah. It's a good modality. Yes, I agree with you. It's effective for a lot of people.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So now we're just going to take a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about who we are, those of us who are bringing you the show. The team would first like to acknowledge somebody you won't be hearing from, but who was super instrumental in the creation of the show, one of the very first people to envision this podcast many years ago, Mary Russell. Mary is now a veteran compassionate inquiry practitioner and facilitator. And part of her secret sauce really comes from her former life, her former career. Mary was a multi-award-winning international BBC producer. We're so grateful we had the opportunity to receive her guidance and expertise as we formulated the show. And now I present to you Kevin Young and Rosemary Davies-Janes.
So the first question I have really is around your involvement in compassionate inquiry. Kevin, why did you choose this path? What spoke to you? What moved you onto it?
I didn't choose it. It chose me. And when I look back at my own, history and how I grew up, and compassion and people and negotiation and leadership, happiness have always been things that I've been really passionate about. Spirituality and how we can find this idea of essence and presence and truth and our self in spirituality has always been something that I've been really passionate about. And also because of where I'm from, spirituality equals religion. And as I said before, religion equals sectarianism, and sectarianism equals violence. So I found myself steering away from it, or trying to pull myself away from what I was being called towards for a long time, until later in life, and I started finding spirituality didn't have to have a sectarian religious connotation. That led me to Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, meditation, which then led me to Gabor. And a very brief story, in 2016 or something, maybe 2017, there was a little post on social media, somebody talking about addiction and how we vilify and criminalize addicts, when in fact addicts are the most traumatized people in our society, something like that. And I just thought, that's what I think. And I shared that post and wrote a little bit about it on social media. And that was maybe summertime 2017. Then at Christmas, my wife bought me a book. I thought to myself, I'll just read the first page. You know, Christmas morning, I'll just read the first page. And I got lost in it for 2 weeks. You know, I was just like straight in, couldn't put it down, read the book. And when I finished, I came to my wife and I said, why did you buy me that book? And she said, that's the same guy that wrote the post that you didn't shut up about for months earlier in the year. And it was Gabor, the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction. I just thought, this is somebody saying what I am not able to articulate. This is somebody saying what I think, what I feel. And it just, all of my spirituality, all of my compassion practices, all of my leadership skills, it seemed like Gabor, and certainly that the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts just sat right in the middle of all that and gave all those things a common pool, a common place for them to be. And, you know, found the website. There wasn't even a training at that stage. There was no training. There was no nothing. I just went in and read other books by Gabor and his other books. And then the training became available and I was straight away. Yeah, find the money, find the time, signed up for the training. And the rest is history, Rosemary, because I have been Compassionate Inquiry as a community has answered or helped me scratch a lot of the itches that I had about my own life, a place where we can be authentic, a place where we can express, a place where we're challenged, a place where we're continually pushed back into ourselves to discover ourselves. So the reason I'm in the work is because of that. And the reason that I came to it is because Gabor seemed to speak my language. And I have always had a fascination with people. You know, what makes us tick? Why do we think the way we do? Why do we behave the way we do? Why do I behave the way I behave? Why do people agree? Why do people disagree? How do people find tribe? Why do people create community? How do people end up in cults? Why do people move to religion? You know, why do people engage in tribal things like soccer or American football? Or these things have always fascinated me. You know, I'm just fascinated by the human condition and why we tick.
Well, it sounds like curiosity is an innate and natural trait for you. So it's just, and it's interesting how you describe how seeing that first little post landed with you, because and I'll ask this question, for me, I didn't know why I was being pulled in the direction I was when I first came across Gabor's work, but it was a strong pull, and the why of the pull revealed itself afterwards. Was it like that for you, or were you actually conscious of what was so of such interest to you?
No, I wasn't conscious of it. It was just, you know, my interest in people was just kind of who I was. Wasn't something I decided to do or decided to focus on. And then when Gabor, you know, I read that post, it just excited me. Like somebody somewhere is talking like I want to talk, and somebody somewhere is giving voice to what I want to say, and I want to know who that is. I want to be involved. And as you were chatting, there was something else that I'm aware about myself. I often find myself on the wrong side of discussions because, you know, when people would do abhorrent things or really terrible things, even before long before Compassionate Inquiry, I would find myself saying, yeah, but I wonder what was going on for them. And this often got me in trouble with, oh, they're criminals, or they're rapists, or they're just junkies, or they're, you know, they're violent people. I'm like, yeah, but why? What I mean, what's going on for that person? And yeah, that often found me in a sticky wicket and paddling against the current in a world where people just wanted to blame and criminalize and marginalize people who were doing really terrible things.
There's always a motivation, you know, even the most despicable hacker has a motivation.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated by that. What is that?
Thank you for your answer on that, Kevin. Now we come to the next question, which is, why did you get involved in this podcast? What attracted you to really getting the word out to the public, picking up the baton from Gabor and carrying on with your voice what he started 25 years ago?
Because, Rosemary, I believe in it, because I believe it works. And my altruistic nature, if this works, why would I keep it? Why would I keep it hidden? Why would we keep it hidden? Why as a community would we keep this hidden? Why would we not share this with the world? That's why I'm passionate about people's well-being, their health, communities, societies. And if I get very grandiose, I'm passionate about living in a world where people live at peace and are happy and satisfied and content. And I believe that compassionate inquiry will not deliver that on its own, but I believe it is a great avenue or modality to help that happen. That's why I can't talk enough about compassionate inquiry to people who are willing to listen. I used to talk a lot to people who didn't want to listen, and the podcast gives me an opportunity to share this wisdom, this work, this knowledge, the resources with a worldwide audience. I was just about to say, and I get to talk to interesting people. I was about to say, and I get to talk, which is something that I think I'm fairly well known for in the CI community. I like to talk and ask questions, and I think I'm the person. When a class is about to end, and the teacher says, "Has anyone any other questions?" And the etiquette is for no one to ask a question because everyone wants to go home. I'm the person that says, "Yeah, I have more. I want to ask more questions." And I can imagine, the whole class going, "Oh, what he's talking again." So just my passion for people, getting curious around people, and then sending something out into the world that I really strongly believe will help people to heal, have better relationships, have happier, more productive, more content lives. That's good enough for me. I also, Rosemary, thought it'll be great fun. It'll be great fun. Why wouldn't I? This is somebody saying to a kid, "Would you like to come and sit in the candy store and choose all the candies that you want?" To someone like me, "Would you like to sit on a podcast where you interview lots of interesting people about lots of interesting topics?" Hell yes. That's why this podcast.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your words and your mission. Just beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, Rosemary, I'm really interested to hear from you. Why this work? How did you get involved in this type of work?
It was not my intention. I was maybe 5 or 6 months out of an abusive relationship, and I stumbled across the Wisdom of Trauma movie. And I don't know why, but it took me on a deep dive. I had never heard of Gabor before, but I was just so moved by what he said. It was kind of like a baited hook that I had to grab onto and follow, not really knowing where it was leading me, but just knowing this was what was next for me. And, I did put the pieces together later on, but I couldn't jump into any training right away, which fortunately was available because that was 2021. So I jumped into training as the next class to open up, I jumped into, and then the next one after that. And it's been, a couple of years journey. And through that process, reading all Gabor's books, watching YouTube videos, just really a deep, deep dive. I was insatiable. And it occurred to me why compassionate inquiry. It answered so many questions. It connected dots for me. What I'd been doing for the 20 plus years prior to that is working as an authenticity coach, helping people uncover their authentic expression, building authentic brands if they were in the business world, entrepreneurs or business owners, just really understanding themselves, because I also have always wondered what makes people tick. I traveled internationally as a little kid due to my dad's relocation, and it always puzzled me as to why I got along really well in certain countries and had no problem making friends. And in other countries, I was shunned and made an outsider. And this really explained all that. Plus, it explained the blocks that my clients had against accepting and owning what I showed to them as their true, authentic selves. And that had always been a puzzle to me. But the compassionate inquiry training uncovered, hidden beliefs, coping strategies, survival strategies that we adopt. And it was healing for me. And it was also very beneficial for the clients I was working for in that coaching role. So it really connected a lot of dots for me and explained why people I'd encountered in the past, including my parents, had behaved in ways that at the time I thought were so confusing. How can something be okay one day and then the next day it's not okay to the point of being punished? It really helped me make sense of the past and the present. So that's the gift. And the community has been the first time I really found what I could call my tribe or my people. And that's been very, very unexpected. I didn't know such a community existed. And it's just been delightful to know that, there are lots more people like me who are curious and just really interested in being their authentic selves.
Beautiful answer, Rosemary.
Thank you.
I like how both of us light up when we talk about this.
Yeah, I've probably spent time talking to the wrong people about it as well.
A lot of time. Let me ask you this question then, Rosemary, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why this podcast? What made you get involved in a project like this?
Well, I was lucky enough to be invited. I had run a podcast 20 years ago before they were called podcasts. It was called internet radio back then. And I loved it. I sort of thought of it in my head as my own personal PhD. I had some great guests on, and I learned so much from them. Some people were very well known in the world, and other people were lesser known. But this was something I did all by myself. I produced it. It was aired through Voice America. I chose the guests. I did all the marketing. And I eventually had to shut it down. It was a passion project. I eventually had to shut it down because as an entrepreneur and single mom, taking care of my family and taking care of my business that was generating revenue, and this passion project, something had to give. So I, with great reluctance, shut it down. And I've been for the last couple of years thinking I'd really love to get back into that again because I do have the space and the time open now. I spent a lot of time educating people about what a podcast was or what internet radio was. Now nobody needs that education, but there's so many people talking about so many things. So my challenge was, what do I really want to put out there in the world? What would be really beneficial for people to hear? And this opportunity came up, and it was like, my question was answered. I can go out there and have a global platform to take this approach out into the world and demonstrate for people the impact it can make in their lives and offer some hope, offer a pathway to people through my guest stories that will perhaps shed some light in the darkness that might be present in their life. So to me, it seemed like divine intervention, that invitation, which I accepted with delight.
That's another lovely answer, Rosemary. Thank you. Shed some light in the darkness of their lives.
People are in situations that they may be consciously shut down, or maybe just subconsciously aware that something's not right. And I'm really, really hoping that those people will stumble across this podcast and be intrigued enough to take a listen and see that there are ways to shift what is now to what you wish it to be.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for sticking around this long. This is Jem. I am an occasional host and producer of the show. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my why as well. I have a lot of similar things to say as Kevin and Rosemary about how Gabor's work found me. And I want to illustrate that through a quick story, kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch that happened. I first heard and became very intrigued by Gabor through an interview on the Tim Ferriss show, where Tim was gracious enough to do a live demo with Gabor. And what that demonstration revealed was that we're often living in the past and we're not responding to the present moment. Why that really landed with me at that moment was I was a huge fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I still am. But, this idea that 95% of the time we're operating on a subconscious level or an unconscious level resonated a lot, but I didn't quite understand how. And it was Gabor that helped that concept really land with me. Our responses are not usually responses, but reactions coming from a deep core wound within ourselves. And it's that core wounding that creates this subconscious belief we have about ourselves. And this literally hijacks our interactions with people and our interpretations of reality. And that really intrigued me. 2 days later, I go to see my acupuncturist because I am dealing with this ongoing autoimmune issue that's a total mystery. And she brings up Gabor Maté because what I did not know was that she is a compassionate inquiry practitioner. She brought up Gabor Maté. I said, wow, I just heard a podcast. That's fascinating. She agreed that it was fascinating and promptly suggested that the next book I read would be When the Body Says No. So I live abroad and I was getting ready to travel to the US where I'm from. And I took the opportunity to download the book. I was very busy when I got to the US because I was studying under a program to become certified to be a functional medicine coach. And the dots I was trying to put together at the time were, what are the connections between women, trauma, and autoimmune illness? So picture me in a rental car running around Orlando, Florida, trying to get this battery of functional medicine tests done because our first subjects would be ourselves. I had an extremely limited amount of time to take these tests at certain times of the month, depending on my cycle and all these other factors. And in the meantime, I was also having a vacation with my family and visiting my mother, which is a whole other thing, you guys. But I had just managed to get this blood test done and sent in the mail. And I was running home, but I didn't have any money because I didn't have any cash because I don't actually live in the US anymore. So I was taking all these alternative toll-free roads to get back home. And I was very late and I was very concerned about holding up everything and everybody. And I had to pee so bad. And I would not stop the car. And at this point in my life, maybe you can relate, my discomfort was something I would totally zone out. And I couldn't zone it out because here I am listening to all of these stories, these case studies in the book When the Body Says No about these people who had denied the messages from their bodies. And it finally just hit me. Here I am taking these tests to get to the bottom of this illness that's been just a mystery to me for years. And I see the way I'm denying my own pain on a super regular basis. What was I believing about myself? And that began my path into compassionate inquiry. The moment that I knew I would be sitting here speaking into this microphone to you eventually was literally moments after I finished watching The Wisdom of Trauma. And when I heard Gabor talking about the call to create a more trauma-informed society where we'd have trauma-informed education, trauma-informed medicine, trauma-informed therapy, this is where my path converged with that of Rosemary's and Kevin's. I knew my teacher was here. And I also knew that he couldn't just be my teacher, that I wanted to help. I wanted to be another person holding this light that he was offering to the world. I wanted to do my part in it. So after you've heard us all share our immense gratitude, love, admiration, respect for Gabor's work, allow us now to close with something super important that he drops in within that first year training, within the very first line of teachings, is this idea that the last thing compassionate inquiry is trying to project is some form of guruism. While Gabor's teachings are central to the learning of the approach, that it's not about him, it's about what he's learned. So his teachings are meant to be digested and metabolized and expressed through us as individuals. And that's what we're doing in this show. We're showing how that has happened in the lives of the people who practice, who apply this approach of compassionate inquiry. And we're seeing what it looks like as it finds its legs in the world. We're investigating how this approach to create a trauma-informed society is serving to help people reconnect with their truth, with their authenticity. So from the bottom of our collective hearts, we recognize your presence here today, and we celebrate this journey that we share as we carry this light together. Thank you so much for being here.
The Gifts of Trauma is a weekly podcast that features personal stories of trauma healing, transformation, and the gifts revealed on the path to authenticity. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personal therapy or a DIY formula for self-therapy. We'd like to thank you for being here today, and we'd also like to thank our guests, as well as Gabor Maté, Sataram Kaur, and the Compassionate Inquiry admin team, marketing team, and podcast team. Please join us again next week to hear more stories of transformation and healing through compassionate inquiry.